Hello students, now we are going to learn Business and Accounting Studies Chapter 4, Introduction to Accounting. This is the very first chapter under O-level accounting. So you're going to learn the basics of accounting. Okay, first of all, let's understand what accounting is. Now, this is actually a famous question in your paper. Define accounting, or what is accounting? So how do you define accounting? According to our O-level syllabus, the accounting is the process of providing information required by interested parties of a business for their decision making. Right. Shall we read out again? Accounting is the process of providing information required by the interested parties of a business for their decision making. Now, instead of these two words, required by, you can just put two. So it should be accounting is the process of providing information to the interested parties of a business for their decision making. Right, now here, this information means it's actually, this information is financial information. Okay, what is financial information? Simply, financial information is the information regarding money. Okay, what is financial information? It's information regarding money. So basically, accounting is about providing information to whom? To the interested parties of a business. Do you remember the term that we used to call parties who are interested in a business? You call them who? Stakeholders, right? Stakeholders. So it's basically accounting involves in providing information to stakeholders. Now, why do stakeholders need information? Actually, for them to make decisions, right? Decision making, for them to make decisions. So accounting basically provides information to stakeholders for their decision making, for them to make decisions. Right? Did you study the definition? You have to study this, right? Because as I told you earlier, normally this question comes in your paper, maybe a term test paper, maybe in your O-level paper. So study this. Accounting is the process of providing information to the interested parties of a business for their decision making. Okay, let's take one of the stakeholders is owners, the most interested party of a business, isn't it? Let's take only one owner. Let's say this is a sole proprietorship, right? Let's say this business is a bookshop, okay? Now, the owner of a bookshop, right, might have to arrive at certain decisions regarding his business, right? Say, for example, this owner wants to expand the business, right? Let's say he wants to open up a new bookshop in the next town. Now, expanding the business whether to expand the business or not is a certain decision, right? So in order to arrive at this decision, this owner may have to consider some information regarding the business, especially, let's say, the profit level of the business. The owner should know whether the business makes a sufficient profit or not. Let's say if his current business doesn't make much profit, it might not be viable to open another bookshop, right? So remember, the stakeholders, they need information regarding the business, especially this financial information, for them to make certain decisions. So simply, the accounting provides information to the interested parties of a business for their decision making. Okay, right. So that is accounting, right? So you should be able to define the term accounting. හරි මම දැන් සිංහලෙනුත් පොඩි පැහැදිලි කිරීමක් කරන්න. accounting කියන්නේ සාමාන්‍යයෙන් ව්‍යාපාරයක තොරතුරු ලබා දෙන ක්‍රියාවලියක්. හරි? තොරතුරු ඒ කියන්නේ information. එතකොට මේ තොරතුරු ලබා දෙන්නේ business එක ගැන interest එකක් දක්වන එහෙම නැත්නම් උනන්දුවක් දක්වන පාර්ශව වෙත. හරි? තොරතුරු ලබා දෙන්නේ business එක ගැන උනන්දුවක් දක්වන පාර්ශවයන් වෙත. ඇයි මෙහිම තොරතුරු ලබා දෙන්නේ? ඒ පාර්ශවවලට තීරණ ගන්න. හරි? decision making. තීරණ ගන්න. අපි අපේ සිලබස් එකේ කතා කරන්නේ financial information. මොකද මේ O level syllabus එකේ තියෙන accounting ඇවිල්ලා financial accounting. හරි? ඒ කියන්නේ financial information කියන්නේ සල්ලි සම්බන්ධයෙන් මුදල් සම්බන්ධයෙන් තියෙන තොරතුරු. ව්‍යාපාරයක මුදල් සම්බන්ධයෙන් තියෙන තොරතුරු. එතකොට තව දෙයක් තමයි මේ interested parties of a business. එහෙම නැත්නම් ව්‍යාපාරය ගැන උනන්දුවක් දක්වන පාර්ශව වලට අපිට කියන්න පුළුවන් business studies knowledge එකෙන් business studies දැනුම පාවිච්චි කරලා මේගොල්ලන්ට අපි කියන්නේ stakeholders නේ. අපි stakeholders කියලා කිව්වේ. එතකොට එක stakeholder කෙනෙක් තමයි ඇත්තටම owner කියන්නේ නැත්නම් owners කියන්නේ. හරි ව්‍යාපාරය ගැන අතිශය උනන්දු පාර්ශවයක් නේ. වැඩියෙන්ම ව්‍යාපාරය ගැන උනන්දුවක් දක්වන්නේ ඒ බිස්නස් එකේ ඒ ව්‍යාපාරයේ අයිතිකරු. එහෙම නැත්නම් අයිතිකරුවන්. owner එහෙම නැත්නම් owners. එතකොට අපි උදාහරණයක් විදිහට ගත්තොත් දැන් owner කෙනෙක් හරි අයිතිකරුවෙක් අපි හිතමු sole proprietorship owner කෙනෙක් කියලා. හරි තනි පුද්ගල ව්‍යාපාරයක අයිතිකාරයෙක් කියලා හිතන්න. එතකොට ඒ අයිතිකාරයාට ඒ ඕනට අවශ්‍ය වෙනවා කියලා හිතන්න මේ ව්‍යාපාරය expand කරන්න, පුළුල් කරන්න, තව වැඩි දියුණු කරන්න. අපි හිතමු දැන් එයා මේ වෙලාවේ book shop එකක අයිතිකාරයෙක්. හරි? එතකොට මෙයාට උමනා වෙනවා ඊළඟ ටවුන් එකේ තව book shop එකක් දාන්න. හරි? එතකොට දැන් ඔය decision එකට ඔය තීරණය ගන්න හරි ඒ කියන්නේ බිස්නස් එක එක්ස්පෑන්ඩ් කරනවද නැද්ද? තව බුක් ෂොප් එකක් දාලා මේ ව්‍යාපාරය වැඩි දියුණු කරනවද නැද්ද කියන තීරණයට යන්න අනිවාර්යෙන් මේ ඕනට අවශ්‍ය වෙනවා financial information. විශේෂයෙන්ම අවශ්‍ය වෙනවා ව්‍යාපාරයේ ලාභය. හරි? profit එක කොච්චරද කියන එක. එතකොට profit එක සම්බන්ධයෙන් තොරතුරු එහෙම නැත්නම් information මේ ඕනට අවශ්‍ය වෙනවා මෙන්න මේ තීරණය ගන්න. මොකද්ද තීරණය? business එක වැඩි දියුණු කරනවද නැද්ද කියන එක. දැන් අපි හිතමු මේ ව්‍යාපාරයේ ගිය අවුරුදු 2-3ෙම එන්න ව්‍යාපාරයේ තියෙන profit amount එක එන්න අඩු වෙලා. right? එන්න ලාභය අඩු වෙලා. දැන් උහුම අවස්ථාවකදී ඇත්තටම ගොඩක් වෙලාවට තව බුක් ෂොප් එකක් ඕපන් කරන එක එච්චරම නුවණට හුරු නැති වෙන්න පුළුවන් නේ. ඉතින් එහෙම ඕන කෙනෙක්ට තීරණ ගන්න හරි අනිවාර්යෙන් ව්‍යාපාරයේ සම්බන්ධයෙන් තියෙන ෆයිනෑන්ෂියල් ඉන්ෆර්මේෂන් මුදල් සම්බන්ධයෙන් තියෙන තොරතුරු අවශ්‍ය වෙනවා. ඒතර මේ තොරතුරු ලබා දෙන්නේ පුතා accounting කියන process එකකින්. ව්‍යාපාරයේ accounting කියන ක්‍රියාවලියෙන් තමයි මේ තොරතුරු ලබා දෙන්නේ. හරි ඒ නිසා හොඳට මතක තියාගන්න accounting definition එක අනිවාර්යෙන් වැදගත්. මොකද ඒක ගොඩක් වෙලාවට අපේ ප්‍රශ්න පත්‍රයේ paper එකේ අහන ප්‍රශ්නයක් what is accounting? එහෙම නැත්නම් define the term accounting කියන දේ. එසා මේ definition එක හොඳට මේ වෙලාවෙම study කරලා ඉවර කරන්න. හරි. Okay, now we know that accounting provides information to the stakeholders for their decision making. Now, this information is given to the stakeholders through various reports, various financial reports. This means accounting provides various reports to the stakeholders, and these reports include all the relevant information. So generally, these reports are called financial statements. You will learn how to prepare financial statements in grade 11. Just remember these two words, financial statements. These are like, reports. And these reports include information. And these information is given to stakeholders for their decision making. Okay, next we are going to take a look at objectives of accounting or the need of accounting. Why does a business need accounting? Seriously, does a business need accounting? Yes, of course. Accounting is a must-have for every business. Why? Because of these reasons, right? These are the objectives of accounting. The main reason is that accounting provides information for decision making. So we call it main objective, right? The main objective of accounting is to provide information for decision making. Do you remember these words were in our definition, right? Accounting definition. So this is another famous question. What is the main objective of accounting? Providing information for decision making. Let's put 2 here. To provide information for decision making. Okay, that's the main objective of accounting. Remember, the business decisions cannot be made without proper information. So accounting is a crucial requirement for every business, right? Because it provides information for decision making in the business. Right, now you have 4 other objectives over here. Let's read out the second one. To know whether the business has earned an adequate profit. Right, now you know what profit is, right? What is profit? It's the difference between income and expenses, right? When you deduct expenses from the income of a business, you can arrive at the profit of the business. One of the output of the whole accounting process is the profit. So we need to have proper accounting in order to know the real profit of the business. So as I told you earlier, accounting is a must-have for every business. So as a second objective, you can study that to know whether the business has earned an adequate profit, right? Definitely remember the first objective, that is the main objective. And second one, also one of the best objectives, right? And then third one, to know whether the financial position of the business is sound. So what's the meaning of financial position? Now, if you are a grade 10 student, for now, I'm going to give you a very simple meaning of this. But when you go to grade 11 and if you learn grade 11 accounting, you will learn the real meaning of financial position. Okay. But for now, just understand that the financial position is about like whether the business has enough money or not, whether the business financial position is sound or not, right? So using the information given by the accounting process, the business can understand whether the financial position of it is good or bad. Now, next objective is to fulfill legal requirements. Right now, legal requirements, actually for some businesses, it is compulsory to disclose the financial information, maybe to the public. Now, businesses like incorporated companies, they are required to disclose their financial information by the law. So to fulfill legal requirements, some businesses need to do accounting. And then to avoid omission and commission of transactions and to organize financial activities. Now, omission means it's like when you forget to record a transaction is not recorded. It is missed, right? And commission means actually, it's like incorrect recording of the transaction. Now, there is a certain way to record transactions you will learn in the future chapters. So, if there is incorrect recording of a transaction, we normally call commission of transaction. So, to avoid these mistakes, a business needs accounting, a proper system of accounting. And then to organize financial activities. So through accounting, we can actually organize our financial activities, all the transactions, all the events, all the activities. So these are the objectives of accounting. There are 5 objectives. There is a main objective. So remember these objectives. හරි මම දැන් සිංහලත් එකතු කරලා පොඩ්ඩක් පැහැදිලි කරන්න. මෙතන කතා වෙන්නේ accounting වල objectives අරමුණු. එතකොට ප්‍රධාන වශයෙන් ව්‍යාපාරයක් accounting පවත්වාගෙන යන්නේ ඒ කියන්නේ main objective එක ඇත්තටම තීරණ ගන්න තොරතුරු සැපයීම. තීරණ ගන්න තොරතුරු සපයන්න තමයි accounting පාවිච්චි කරන්නේ. හරි? To provide information for decision making. ඒතර අපි දන්නවා තොරතුරු දෙන්නේ ව්‍යාපාරය ගැන interested parties ලට. එතකොට එයාලට තීරණ ගන්න, decision making, තීරණ ගන්න. දෙවෙනියට to know whether the business has earned an adequate profit. Adequate means adequate කියන්නේ ප්‍රමාණවත්. හරි? Enough. ප්‍රමාණවත් ලාභයක් මේ ව්‍යාපාරයේ උපයලාද නැද්ද කියන එක හරියට accounting පවත්වාගෙන ගියා නම් අපිට හොයාගන්න පුළුවන් වෙනවා. හරි ඊළඟට to know whether the financial position of the business is sound. හරිද? ඒ කියන්නේ දැන් financial position සිංහලෙන් කිව්වොත් මූල්‍ය තත්ත්වය. simply කිව්වොත් සරලව කිව්වොත් ව්‍යාපාරයේ business එකේ මූල්‍ය තත්ත්වය හොඳද නැද්ද කියන එක අපිට calculations වලින් ගණනය කිරීම වලින් හොයාගන්න පුළුවන් වෙනවා accounting හරහා. හරි ඊළඟට to fulfill legal requirements. දැන් සමහර වෙලාවට නීතියෙන් සමහර ව්‍යාපාර වලට කියනවා ගිණුම්කරණය පවත්වාගෙන යෑම අනිවාර්යයි. ඒ හොයාගන්න මූල්‍ය තොරතුරු සමහර වෙලාවට රහස තියාගන්න බෑ. ඒක හෙළිදරව් කරලා තියෙන්න ඕනේ. එහෙම නෛතික අවශ්‍යතාවයන් තියෙන්න පුළුවන් සමහර ව්‍යාපාර වලට උදාහරණයක් විදිහට incorporated companies සිංහලෙන් කියන්නේ සංස්ථාපිත සමාගම්. මේ කියන ව්‍යාපාර වර්ගයට ඇත්තටම legal requirements වැඩි. එතකොට සමහර වෙලාවට ගිණුම්කරණය පවත්වාගෙන යන්නේ ඇත්තටම නෛතික අවශ්‍යතාවයන් සපුරන්න. To fulfill legal requirements. හරි අන්තිමට තියෙනවා to avoid omission and commission of transactions. ඒ කියන්නේ දැන් අපි තුමු omission කියන එකේ මෙතන තේරුම සමහර වෙලාවට අපිට transaction එකක් එහෙම නැත්නම් ගනුදෙනුවක් රෙකෝඩ් කරන්න නැත්නම් පොත්වල ලියන්න අමතක වෙනවා. හරි transaction එකක් පොත්වල සටහන් කරන්න නැත්නම් accounting books වල රෙකෝඩ් කරන්න අමතක වෙනවා. ඒතර තමයි ඔය omission of transactions කියන්නේ. commission කියන්නේ සමහරට අපි රෙකෝඩ් කරපු විදිය වැරදි. omission commission කියන්නේ ඇත්තටම මේවා වැරදි. ගිණුම් කරන වැරදි. ඒතර මේ වැරදි නිවැරදි කරගන්න නැත්නම් මෙහෙම වැරදි ඇති නොවෙන්න අපි අනිවාර්යෙන් ගිණුම් කරණය පාවිච්චි කරන්න වෙනවා accounting පාවිච්චි කරන්න වෙනවා. එතකොට ඒ accounting වල තව objective එකක් තමයි මේ වගේ දේවල් වළක්වා ගන්න එක. ඒ වගේම financial activities ඒ කියන්නේ ව්‍යාපාරයේ තියෙන ගනුදෙනු සියලුම මූල්‍ය කටයුතු අපිට හොඳට organize කරලා සංවිධානය කරලා පිළිවෙලකට තියාගන්න පුළුවන් වෙනවා accounting system එකක් ව්‍යාපාරේ පවත්වාගෙන යනවා නම්. Okay, now let's learn business transactions. Right, now you have a definition here. A transaction is an exchange of resources between a business and other parties. Study now, right? A transaction is an exchange of resources. You know what resources are, right? Between a business and other parties. This is an exchange happens between the business and another party. Isn't it? Right. So first thing is you have to study your definitions. That's a must, right? So study this definition right now and I'll explain with an example, right? Now, as you can see, here we have our business, right? And I have mentioned two parties over here. The customer and a supplier. So these are, parties, right? Right. Now let's take this business as a bookshop, right? Now I'm going to show you an exchange of resources between the business and a customer. Okay? Now you tell me, right? What does a bookshop sell to its customer? It's stationery, right? Stationery. Now in accounting, the things that are sold to the customer by the business is called stock of goods. Okay? Or you can simply say stock. But since there is less space here, I'm going to write just stock. But precisely, it's a stock of goods, right? Now here the stock is stationery, right? Right. I'm going to write stationery also. Stationery. So here the transaction is selling, or you can say sale of stock to the customer, right? Sale of stock or selling stock. Let's say the worth of this stationery stock is 10,000 rupees. Okay. Now, in return, what happens? In return, the customer, now always think from the side of the business. Now listen well. When you learn accounting, right, for you to understand accounting in a better manner, you have to imagine that you're a business. You're a business owner, or you are the accountant of that business, then you can easily understand accounting concepts. Okay, so this point onwards, just think like you are this business. You do this business. You're the person who keeps accounting. Do accounting for this business. Okay, then you can easily understand what I say. Fine. Now, as I told you earlier, this is your transaction. Why I say it as a transaction? Because there is an exchange of resources. Seriously, there is an exchange of resources, right? So the business gives the goods, the stock of goods to the customer. In return, the business receives what? Cash. Now, don't say money. Let's say cash when we learn accounting, when we do accounting. Money, of course, okay. But let's use this term cash. Now, the stock of goods, right? And the cash, both are resources, right? And there is an exchange, right? There is an exchange of resources. So this is a transaction. Here you see a transaction, right? What is our transaction here? Selling stock of goods for 10,000 rupees. So this is a transaction. Right, on the other hand, right? Now we have the supplier on the other hand. So what's the resource exchange? Exchange of resources. Right? What do you write here? Tell. It's once again now for a business to sell stationery, the business should buy stationery from a stationery supplier, isn't it? In Sri Lanka, we have several stationery suppliers like Promate, Virodhara, Atlas. So let's say this is Promate. Okay. I just, put actually a person's picture here. Anyhow, let's say this is Promate. Okay. So what happens now? The business buys stock of goods from this supplier, isn't it? So for buying, I'm going to write purchasing. Same meaning, right? Purchasing purchasing what? Stock of goods, right? I'm not going to write of goods here. So what is the stock here? It's stationery, right? Let's say for 7,000 rupees or whatever amount, right? And in return, the business should pay what? Cash to the supplier, isn't it? So this is an exchange of resources. Therefore, this is once again a transaction. What is a transaction here? It's purchasing stock of goods from this supplier for 7,000 rupees. So students, these are two transactions. So likewise, between a party, another party, and the business, there can be exchange of resources. And these are called transactions. Okay, that's the definition of transaction. Shall we look at it again? Right, study again. What is a transaction? A transaction is an exchange of resources between a business and other parties. It can be between the business and a supplier, between the business and a customer, between the business and a bank, So what's the business transaction happens between the business and a bank? It can be obtaining a bank loan, right? Or else the other way around. What is the other way around? Settlement of the bank loan. So likewise, a transaction is an exchange of resources between a business and other parties, right? Now, the next thing that you should know is the amount of a transaction can be measured in terms of money. We can measure transactions. How? In terms of money, in terms of cash. So every transaction has a monetary value according to our syllabus because we are learning financial accounting. So our transactions are monetary transactions. So they can be measured in terms of money. Now, let's say you can measure the weight in terms of kilograms, grams, or milligrams. So you can actually measure a transaction in terms of money. Okay, remember it. And the next important point is there are two types of transactions: cash transactions and credit transactions. Very important, right? A transaction can occur on a cash basis or credit basis. Okay, so remember there can be two types of transactions. Transactions occur based on cash or transactions occur based on credit. මුදල් ගනුදෙනු සහ ණයට වෙන ගනුදෙනු. ණයට වෙන්නේ. ගනුදෙනුව සිදු වෙන්නේ ණයට. Now, let's say, for example, let's take the previous example. Now, if you take selling stock, now this is a cash transaction. No? Why? Because the customer gave money in return. But let's say the business saw goods on credit, right? So this is actually a credit transaction now. If you have these two terms, these two words on credit, this transaction becomes a credit transaction. Now, just try to understand the difference. Now, if I say the same words, selling stock of goods for or at 10,000 rupees on credit, just understand that this second transaction is a credit transaction. It's a credit transaction. Okay. And what about the first one? It is a cash transaction. Are we clear? So basically, students, you have two types of transactions. Transactions occur based on cash and transactions occur based on credit. Okay? හරි. දැන් සිංහල එකතු කරලා ඔන්න පැහැදිලි කරනවා. හරි? අපි මුලින්ම කරන්න ඕන වැඩේ තමයි පුතා definition එක study කරන එක. මොකද definitions අපේ paper එකේ අහන නිසා. හරි? ඉතින් what is a transaction කියලා හෙව්වොත් ඔයා උත්තර දෙන්න ඕනේ. A transaction is an exchange of resources between a business and other parties. මෙතන වෙන්නේ resource exchange කරගන්නවා. නැත්නම් හුවමාරු කරගන්නවා. business එකයි තව party එකක් අතර තමයි මේ හුවමාරුව සිදු වෙන්නේ. දැන් උදාහරණයක් විදිහට මම ගත්ත example එක මම ගත්තේ business එක විදිහට bookshop එකක්. එතකොට අපි දන්නවා business එකේ බිස්නස් එකේ ඉන්න කස්ටමර් කෙනෙක් එක්ක බිස්නස් එක අතර සිදු වෙන්න පුළුවන් රිසෝස් එක්ස්චේන්ජ් එකක්. හරි සම්පත් හුවමාරුවක් නේ? ඉතින් අපි දන්නවා අනිවාර්යෙන් කස්ටමර්යි බිස්නස් එකයි අතර තියෙන ට්‍රාන්සැක්ෂන් එක. බිස්නස් එක පැත්තෙන් අපි කතා කරන්න ඕනේ හැම වෙලාවෙම. ඒ නිසා හොඳට තේරුම් ගන්න පුතා ඔයා accounting හොඳට ඔළුවට දා ගන්නවා නම් ඔයා imagine කරන්න ඕනේ ඔයා බිස්නස් එකක් කරනවා කියලා. නැත්නම් ඔයා තමයි මේ බිස්නස් එක කියන එක ඔළුවට දාගෙන තමයි එහෙම හිතලා තමයි මෙතන ස්ටඩීස් ගෙනියන්න ඕනේ accounting වල. හරි එතකොට ඔයාට accounting හොඳට තේරෙන්න ගන්නවා. හොඳට තේරුම් ගන්න පුළුවන් accounting ඔයා ඒ දීලා තියෙන කේස් එකේ බිස්නස් එක ඔයා කරනවා කියලා හිතන්න. ඒක තමයි වෙන්න ඕනේ. හරි? ඉතින් දැන් මෙතන බුක් ෂොප් එක ඔයා කරන්නේ. නැත්නම් මේ බුක් ෂොප් එකේ accounting කරන්නේ ඔයා. මේ බුක් ෂොප් එකේ accountant ඔයා කියලා හිතලා බලන්න. හරි. දැන් ඔයාගේ පැත්තෙන් බිස්නස් එක පැත්තෙන් මොකද්ද වෙන්නේ? කස්ටමර්ට ස්ටොක් එකක් විකුණනවා. කස්ටමර්ට ස්ටොක් ඔෆ් ගුඩ්ස් යම්කිසි ස්ටේෂනරි තොගයක් විකුණනවා. හරි? රුපියල් 10000කට. right? එතකොට දැන් මේක on credit නැතුව මම මුලින් කතා කරේ cash basis නේ. එතකොට අනිත් පැත්තට කස්ටමර් අපිට සල්ලි ගෙවනවා. අපිට මුදල් ලැබෙනවා. දැන් මේ තියෙන ස්ටොක් එකයි cash කියන්නේ resources. ඒක කවුරුත් දන්නවනේ. physical resources. එතකොට මෙතන වෙන්නේ අත්‍තරම වමාරුවක්. නේද? හරි ඊළඟට අනිත් පැත්තට බැලුවොත් අපිට පුළුවන් නද පාටි එකක්. ඒ කියන්නේ තව පාටි එකක් ගන්න. දැන් කලින් අපි ගත්තේ කස්ටමර්නේ. හරි මේ තියෙන එක්තරා පාටි එකක්. ඊළඟට අපිට ගන්න පුළුවන් සප්ලයර් කියන පාටි එක. එතකොට සප්ලයර් බුක් ෂොප් එකයි අතර වෙන ගනුදෙනුවක් විදිහට නැත්නම් ට්‍රාන්සැක්ෂන් එකක් විදිහට අපිට කියන්න පුළුවන් purchasing stock නේ? purchasing stock of goods. අපි දන්නවා බුක් ෂොප් එකක් ඇවිල්ලා මොකද්ද? commodity manufacturing business එකක් නෙමෙයිනේ. ඒගොල්ලෝ කරන්නේ buying and selling. ඒකට ඒගොල්ලෝ කරන්නේ book manufacturer එහෙම නැත්නම් stationery manufacturer කෙනෙක්ගෙන් purchase කරලා තමයි customer ට විකුණන්නේ. So අපි ගමු promate මේ ඉන්නේ supplier. ඒතර promate ගෙන් business එක හැම වෙලාවෙම business එක පැත්තෙන් තමයි අපි work කරන්නේ. හරි? business එක දැන් purchase කරනවා promate ගෙන් නැත්නම් supplier ගෙන් මෙන්න මෙච්චරක කොච්චරකද 7000 rupees worth stock එක. Again stock එක. Because in return සල්ලි දෙන්න වෙනවා අපිට supplierට. එතකොට business එක ඕන දැන් සල්ලි දෙනවා. එතකොට මේ තියෙන්නේ resource exchange එකක් නේ. හරි නේද? ඉතින් definition එක ලස්සනට මේ example එකට අපිට apply කරන්න පුළුවන්. හරි. ඊළඟට මේන්ම දේ තමයි ඔළුවේ තියාගන්න ඕනේ transactions ಜಾති දෙකක් තියෙනවා. සමහර transactions මුදලට වෙන්නේ ඒ කියන්නේ ඒ වෙලාවෙම මුදල් අපි එක්කෝ අපිට මුදල් ලැබෙනවා නැත්නම් අපි මුදල් ගෙවනවා. හරි? cash transactions කියන්නේ අන්න ඒවට. මුදල් ගනුදෙනු. හරි? ඒ වගේම තව transaction වර්ගයක් තියෙනවා. එයාට කියන්නේ credit transactions. එයාලට කියන්නේ credit transactions. credit transaction එකේ පුතා ණයට වෙන්නේ. දැන් උදාහරණයක් අපි මෙතන ගත්තොත් කස්ටමර්ට ණයට විකුණනකොට අපි on credit කියන words දෙන්නව දාන්න ඕනේ. හරි? මේක word කරනවා නම් transaction එක ලියනවා නම් හරි? එතකොට ණයට විකුණනකොට ඔන්න cash ලැබෙන්නේ නැහැ. හැබැයි business එකට ණය වෙච්ච customer කෙනෙක් ඇති වෙනවා. මම මේ ගාවම කියන්නම් මෙයාට කියන නම debtor. හරිද? debtor. මේ මෙතන තියෙන B එක silent. හොඳට මතක තියාගන්න මේ B එක silent. සමහර ළමයි මේ debtor කියනවා. ඒක වැරදි හරි. B එක silent තියාගෙන තමයි අපි pronounce කරන්න ඕනේ. ඒ කියන්නේ මොකද්ද? debtor. සිනලෙන් කියනවා ණය ගැතියා. ඇයි මෙයා business එකට ණයයිනේ. මේ customer business එකට ණයයි. තේරෙනවද ඔයාලට? මේ business එකට මේ ණය වෙච්ච customer කෙනෙක්. හැබැයි ඉතින් මෙයාගෙන් එක්තරා දවසකදී ඒ කියන්නේ අනාගතයේදී මුදල් එනවා. මෙයා සල්ලි ගෙවන්න බෑනේ. ණය වෙලානේ ඉන්නේ. ඒතර මෙතන exchange එකක් තියෙනවා. හරි? එකමාට ඒ වෙලාවෙම exchange එක වෙන්නේ නැහැ. මොකද ණයට වෙන නිසා. ඉතින් ඒක තමයි තියෙන්නේ. ඊට පස්සේ තව දෙයක් අර අනිත් point එක transaction එකක් අපිට measure කරන්න පුළුවන්. හරි දැන් අපි හිතමු බරක් නම් අපිට measure කරන්න පුළුවන් කිලෝග්‍රෑම්, ග්‍රෑම්, මිලිග්‍රෑම් වලින්. අපි හිතමු height එකක් උසක් නම් අපිට මීටර් වලින්, සෙන්ටිමීටර් වලින් measure කරන්න පුළුවන්නේ. මනින්න පුළුවන්. ඒතර transaction එකක් අපි හැමතිස්සෙම මනින්නේ සල්ලි වලින්, මුදලින්. මූල්‍යමය වටිනාකමක් තමයි transaction එකකට තියෙන්නේ පුතා. හරි? ඒතර දැන් මෙතන නම් මේ transaction එකේ value එක අපි මැනලා තියෙනවා measure කරලා තියෙනවා 7,000 rupees. මෙතන 10,000 rupees. Are we clear? Hari? Right. Now I actually forgot to tell this about this data in English. So let me explain once again. Now, as I told you, there are two types of transactions, cash transactions and the credit transactions. Now, when the transaction happens on credit basis, immediately the business doesn't receive cash. What business receives is a debtor. Who is a debtor? A debtor is a customer who owes to the business. Okay, it's like a credit customer. And when you pronounce debtor, you have to make B silent. Don't pronounce B. Some students say debtor. That's wrong. Okay, it's debtor. Debtor, right? B silent. Are we clear? So in this case, immediately the business doesn't receive any cash, but in the future, the debtor pays cash to the business. So the business receives cash. So there is an exchange of resources. Okay. So learn this new word. You call it debtor. And debtor is a customer who owes to the business. Business එකට ණය වෙච්ච customer කෙනෙක් තමයි මේ ඉන්නේ debtor කියලා අපි කියන්නේ යාට. Okay. Now one more thing under business transactions. Right. This is another important point that you have to remember because this is normally tested in MCQs. Okay. So what is this point? Some events. Okay. What events? Some events. Events in Sinhala, it's like Siddhyak. Yam kisi siddhivīmak. Right? Some event. But not every event. Okay? Not every event. It's some events. Okay? That occurred in the business are also considered as transactions. So we already learned that a business transaction is an exchange of resources. But here it says some events. An event is not a transaction. But some events, some special events, we need to consider as transactions. Are we clear? So very important point. Right. What are, examples for some events that we consider as transactions? One event is damage of stock. Here we don't say stocks. Trade stock means the stock that you trade. You means the business. Do you remember? I asked you to become the business now. So I use you for the business now. Hereafter, when I say you, it might be about the business. Are we clear? Right. So damage of trade stock. If the stock is damaged, what happens now? Maybe due to natural disasters, maybe because of animals, a stock might be damaged. So in that case, it becomes a loss to the business, isn't it? Let's say 10,000 rupees worth of a stock is damaged now. So this becomes a loss to the business. So this loss should be considered as a transaction and should be recorded in accounting books. And this will definitely lead to decrease the profit of this business. Are we clear? Right? So these type of events, we need to consider as transactions. And another example is this. The trade receivable, right? The trade receivable means a debtor. Do you remember this word? I taught you, right? Simply, it's the customer who owes the business, isn't it? Right? Business එකට ණය වෙච්ච customer කෙනෙක්. Now, if this debtor becomes a bad debt, what's a bad debt? Right? Bad debt means, let's say, due to some reason, we cannot recover our due amount from this debtor. Now, this debtor owes the business, right? So he should pay how much? Here it's given 3,000 rupees. So this debtor should pay 3,000 rupees to the business. But due to some reason, if we cannot collect this 3,000 from this debtor, what happens? Once again, this becomes a loss. So this is a loss to the business. 3,000 rupees is lost. And this is a transaction actually. You have to consider this as a transaction, even though it's an event. So this will lead to decrease the profit of your business. Are we clear? So remember, Putala, some events are also considered as transactions. Examples, damage of stock. A debtor becomes a bad debt. We call it bad debt. When we cannot recover the due amount from a debtor, the term that we use is bad debt. Okay? Bad debt. හරි එතකොට මතක තියාගන්න සාමාන්‍යයෙන් transaction එකක් කියන්නේ exchange of resources. හැබැයි සමහර events සමහර සිද්ධි business එකේ වෙන අපිට සලකන්න පුළුවන් transactions කියලා. ඒකට හොඳම උදාහරණ දෙකක් තමයි stock එක damage වෙනකොට අනිත් එක තමයි debtor කෙනෙක් bad debts වෙන එක. මොකද මේ අවස්ථා දෙකේම වෙන්නේ business එකට loss එකක්. දැන් stock එකක් damage වෙන්න පුළුවන් natural disasters නැත්නම් සත්තු මොකක් හරි ආපදාවකින් stock එක damage වෙන්න පුළුවන්. එතකොට ඒ stock damage එකෙන් ඇති වෙන්නේ business එකට පාඩුවක්. කියන්නේ business එකේ profit එක අනිවාර්යෙන් අඩු කරන event එකක් තමයි මේ තියෙන්නේ. ඉතින් ඒ නිසා අපි මේක සාමාන්‍යයෙන් සලකන්න ඕනේ ගනුදෙනුවක් එහෙම නැත්නම් transaction එකක් විදියට අපි අනිවාර්යෙන් මේක අපේ accounting books වල record කරන්න ඕනේ. debtor කෙනෙක් කියන්නේ business එකට ණය වෙච්ච customer කෙනෙක්. මේ කෙනාට මොකක් හරි හේතුවක් නිසා එයාගේ ණය මුදල business එකට settle කරන්න බැරි වුණොත් නැත්නම් අපි business එක පැත්තෙන් කතා කරොත් business එකට debtor ගෙන් ලැබෙන්න ඕනේ ණය මුදල ලබා ගන්න බැරි වුණොත් ඒක තනිකර පාඩුවක්. ඒතර මේ වගේ losses අපි transactions විදිහට අඳුන ගන්නවා. මොකද මේවා events ඇත්තට විච්ච සිද්ධියක්. නමුත් මේක අපි transaction එකක් විදිහට සලකනවා. ඒ නිසා මතක තියාගන්න පුතා සමහර සිද්ධිත් අපිට transactions විදිහට සලකන්න වෙනවා. Okay, now we are going to talk about the most important topic in the whole lesson. It's actually accounting elements. Remember, the accounting elements are the building blocks of accounting. Now, if you can understand the accounting elements, you can easily understand the complex accounting concepts. Now, we know that transactions occur in a business. Now, these accounting elements occur as a result of transactions. What are these accounting elements? Assets, equity, liabilities, income, and expenses. I'm sure that you know these two words, the income and expenses. Adayam, Vyayam. So once again, remember, because of transactions, these accounting elements occur in a business. හරි අපි දැන් දන්නවා business එකක් තුළ transactions වෙනවා. ඒතර මේ transaction නිසා business එකට ඇති වෙනවා accounting elements 5ක්. මේවට කියන්නේ assets, equity, liabilities, income, expenses. Income expenses ඔයා මේ වෙනකොට දන්න වචන දෙකක්. ආදායම් වියදම්. මේ පස් දෙනාම ගැන හොඳට විස්තරාත්මකව අපි ඉගෙන ගන්නයි දැන් යන්නේ. Okay, the first accounting element is called assets. සිංහලෙන් අපි කියනවා වත්කම්. වත්කම්. Right. So as usual, you should know the definition. Right. Now there is a huge definition. Okay. Let's take the beginning part of the definition. An asset is a resource controlled by the business. Let's stop from here. Again, let's read. An asset is a resource. It's simply a resource. You know what resources are. And these resources are controlled by the business. These are like assets owned by the business. Right? So already you know two resources from business transactions. Can you remember from the example that I explained to you? The cash and the stock. So these two are actually two assets of a business. I'll teach you all the assets under your syllabus, all over grade 10 syllabus. Okay? Right. So simply an asset is a resource controlled by the business. And then let's take the next part that arose as a result of a past transaction. Now, an asset comes into a business because of a past transaction. Now, let's take the asset called stock. How come a business receives a stock of goods? That means the things that the business sells to its customers by purchasing the stock, right? By purchasing the stock of goods. So this is a transaction. Can you remember from our example? Purchasing stock is a transaction. So this is the past transaction. Because of this past transaction only, the business receives stock into the business. Okay. Now, how does the business receive cash? Let's say by selling the stock, isn't it? By selling the stock of goods, the business can generate cash. The business can receive cash. So cash is an asset. Cash occurs in the business because of this past transaction. This is actually just one of the transactions that will lead to occur cash. So can you understand? The assets occur because of a past transaction. That's why it says that arose as a result of a past transaction. And then the last part. It's a lengthy definition from which future economic benefits are expected to flow to the business. Now, let me explain in simple words, right? Now, what are future economic benefits? Just imagine that it's about money or cash, right? Now, because of an asset, the business receives money in the future. That's the simple meaning. The business gets money because of an asset. The business receives money because of an asset in the future, right? So this is your definition. This was asked 2 times in the O-level past papers, in the O-level paper. So this is a famous definition that is questioned in your papers. So do study this, right? Right. Then you should study the characteristics of an asset, right? Now, all these characteristics are mentioned in the above definition, right? Look at the second one. Controlled by the business. An asset is always controlled by the business. Business can control its assets. Obviously, it's the business assets, not someone else's assets. So the business can control these assets. Therefore, one of the characteristics of an asset is controlled by the business. And the next one is arose as a result of a past transaction. You know now, I just explained you, right? It's in your definition. And then third one also in your definition, inflow of future economic benefit to the business. Let's put S here, benefits. Okay. So that's the, this is actually this green color highlighted part, right? So the assets lead to inflow, future economic benefits to the business. Simply, the business can earn money from assets. Now, for example, if you take the stock, right? When the business sells its stock, the business can earn cash, isn't it? The business can earn money and income, a future economic benefit, an economic benefit, right? Now, so these are the characteristics of an asset. Study it, Puta, right? Normally, if you are not asked the definition, the paper asks you about the characteristics of an asset, right? Okay, then I'll explain this in, Sinhala as well, by mixing Sinhala actually. Then asset එකක් කියන්නේ simply කතා කරොත් business එකේ තියෙන resource එක. සම්පතක්, resource එක. මේ resource එක අනිවාර්යෙන් ව්‍යාපාරයට පාලනය කරන්න පුළුවන්, control කරන්න පුළුවන්. මොකද මේ business එකේ asset එකක් නිසා. ඒ වගේම මේ asset එක business එකට ඇති වෙන්නේ past transaction එකක් නිසා. කලින් වෙච්ච transaction එකකින් තමා ව්‍යාපාරයට මෙන්න මේ asset එක ඇති වෙන්නේ. හරිනේ? දැන් අපි stock කියන asset එක ගත්තොතින් stock එක ව්‍යාපාරයට ඇති වෙන්නේ ඒ stock එක business එක supplier කෙනෙක්ගෙන් purchase කරපු නිසා. එතකොට purchasing stock of goods කියන්නේ transaction එකක් නේ. හරි. එතකොට කලින් වෙච්ච transaction එකක් හින්දා තමා business එකට assets ඇති වෙන්නේ. තව example එකක් තමයි cash කියන asset එක. දැන් business එකට cash කියන asset එක ඇති වෙන්න හේතු වෙන transactions ගොඩාක් තියෙනවා. අපි එකක් ගත්තොතින් business එකේ stock එක customer කෙනෙකුට sell කරොත් cash basis. අනිවාර්යෙන් business එකට cash ලැබෙනවා. එහෙනම් cash කියන asset එක ඇති උනේ selling the stock of goods කියන past transaction එක නිසා. නේද? කලින් වෙච්ච transaction එකක් නිසා තමයි business එකට මෙයා ඇවිල්ලා තියෙන්නේ දැන්. right. අන්තිමට last point එක definition එකේ තියෙන last point එක තමයි මේ assets වලින් business එකට අනාගතේ මුදල් ලැබෙනවා. එහෙම නැත්නම් economic benefits ලැබෙනවා. වාසි ලැබෙන්නේ. right? ආදායමක් ලැබෙන්න පුළුවන්. දැන් උදාහරණයක් ස්ටොක් එක. ස්ටොක් එක කියන්නේ බිස්නස් එකේ ඇසෙට් එකක්. ස්ටොක් එක කස්ටමර්ට විකුණුවාම බිස්නස් එකට සල්ලි ලැබෙනවා. ඒ කියන්නේ ස්ටොක් එක උදව් කරනවා අනාගතේ ව්‍යාපාරයට සල්ලි ලබා දෙන්න. නේ? right. එතකොට මේ characteristics කියන තුන් දෙනා අනිවාර්යෙන් අපි පාඩම් කරලා තියෙන්න ඕනේ. එක්කෝ අපෙන් asset definition එක අහන්න පුළුවන් නැත්නම් මේ characteristics අහන්න පුළුවන්. සමහර වෙලාවට එකම question එකේ definition එක අහලා ඊට පස්සේ දෙවෙනි කොටසේ characteristics අහන්නත් පුළුවන්. හරි? ඒ නිසා definition එකයි characteristics උයි study කරලා තියන්න පුතා. දැන් හරි මේ වෙලාවෙම ඔයා study කරන්න තව වෙලාවක් තියන්න එපා. ඉගෙන ගන්න වෙලාවෙම study කරලා දාන්න. කළා නැවත නැවත මතක් කරන්න. අනිවාර්යෙන් නැවත නැවත මතක් කරන්න ඕනේ නැත්නම් අමතක වෙනවා. හරි? Right. Now I'm going to ask you a question, right? First of all, I would like to tell you that another asset of business, it is land and building, right? Land and building is an asset of a business. So I would like to raise this question now. Now, if this business has a rented building, a rented one, right? On rent. So is it an asset now? Remember, no, it's not an asset. Why? A rented building cannot be controlled by the business. Why? Because it's someone else's building, not the business's building. Are we clear? Then යම්කිසි ව්‍යාපාරයක building එක ඇවිල්ලා rent එකට තියෙන්නේ. කියන්නේ rent එකට ගත්ත building එක තමයි මේ business එක operate වෙන්නේ. එහෙම වුණොත් පුතා ඒ building එක business එකේ asset එකක් නෙමෙයි. හරි? මොකද ඒ building එක වෙන කෙනෙක්ගේ අයිතියට තියෙන building එකක්. එතකොට business එකට මේක control කරන්න බෑ. මෙන්න මේ characteristic එක එතනදී violate වෙනවා. නේ? මේ characteristic එක fulfill වෙන්නේ නැහැ. Rented building එකක් business එකට control කරන්න බැරි වෙන නිසා. Okay? So remember, any resource which is on rent, if the business uses any resource on rental basis, then that resource is not considered as an asset. Okay? For example, if the business uses a rented building, that building is not an asset of that business. Okay, you know what assets are. Now let's learn the types of assets. We have two types of assets, current assets and non-current assets. Okay, first let's learn what current assets are. Now, once again, there is a definition, right? Now, in short term, you can say that current assets are short-term assets of the business. This short term, according to accounting, is less than 12 months. So according to your definition, the current assets are the assets that are expected to be used, sold, or converted into cash within a short time period as 12 months, right? That means within 12 months actually, in ordinary activities of a business. Right, now in simple terms, as I told you earlier, current assets are the short-term assets of the business. These assets are used, sold, or converted into cash normally within 12 months or less than 12 months within a short time period. Now, the examples for these assets are stock, right? Debtors and cash. Now, already you know the meaning of stock and debtors. So these are actually considered as short-term assets of the business because these assets are normally used, maybe sold or converted into cash within a short time period, and that is within 12 months. Right, don't worry, I'll explain more. So do you remember we have 3 current assets according to grade 10 syllabus. Grade 11 you will learn, when you go to grade 11 you will learn 2 other current assets from adjustments actually. So according to grade 10 syllabus, you should know these 3 current assets. Stock is what the business sells to its customers. Now, if you take a bookshop, the stock will be stationery. If you take a furniture shop, the stock will be furniture. If you take a car sale, the stock will be cars or let's say motor vehicles. So stock is the goods which are sold to the customers by the business. And who are debtors? Do you remember the debtors? Debtor is a customer who owes to the business, right? So debtors occur due to credit sale of goods or the stock of goods. If the business sells its stock or the goods on credit to the customers are called debtors. So this is our business, right? So stock, debtors are assets. You know why they are assets. I explained earlier. And these are actually current assets now. So how do you justify whether these assets are current? Now, the current meaning is short term, right? So these are short term assets. Now, if you take the stock, right? Normally, a business tries to sell its stock within 12 months. The business doesn't keep its stock for years, right? The business always tries to sell its stock as soon as possible. So these are actually current assets. The stock is a current asset. And same with debtors, because now debtors are the customers who owes to the business. And normally the business gives, according to our theory, maximum period, the maximum credit period given by the business to its debtors, it's 3 months. But in reality, this might be lesser than even 3 months, right? So 3 months means obviously less than 12 months, within 12 months. So it's a short period of time, right? So debtors are actually, once again, current assets, because debtors are converted into cash within like 3 months. Stock also, converted into, stock is also converted into cash within 12 months. So both stock and debtors are current assets. And cash, obviously it's current asset because the amount of cash always changes, right? So it's basically current asset. So do you remember? Did you study? What are the 3 current assets? Stock, debtors, and cash. Right. Now, at the same time, learn this point as well. Now, the cash of the business prevails in terms of two forms. The cash of the business exists in terms of two forms. Cash at bank, okay, and cash in hand. Now, when you look at the words, you can understand the meaning. Cash in hand, that means money in hand, right? Cash at bank means the cash of the business, which is in the bank account, which is in the bank, right? So there are two forms of cash in the business, cash at bank and cash in hand. හරි මම ආපහු ටක් ගාලා බ්‍රීෆ් කරන්න. දැන් assets ඇවිල්ලා අපි දන්නවා ඔය ඉගෙන ගත්ත මේකේ තේරුම. assets ඇවිල්ලා business එකක ಜಾති දෙකකින් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. එක જાතියකට කියනවා අපි එක වර්ගයකට කියනවා current assets කියලා. අනිත් වර්ගයට කියන්නේ අපි non current assets. current non current කියලා අපි ಜಾති දෙකක් මෙතන තියෙන්නේ. ඇත්තටම කාල සීමාව time period එක බේස් කරගෙන තමයි මේ current non current කියලා ಜಾති දෙකකට යන්නේ. එතකොට simply ගත්තොත් current asset කියන්නේ business එකේ short term assets. කෙටි කාලීන වත්කම්. කෙටි කාලයයි මේ වත්කම නැත්නම් මේ asset එක business එකේ තියෙන කෙටි කාලයකට. කෙටි කාලයකට පාවිච්චි වෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඊට පස්සේ මේක කෙටි කාලයක් තුල සල්ලි වලට convert වෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඒකට current asset කියනවා. non current asset කියන්නේ ඒක අනිත් පැත්ත. මේක ඇත්තටම long term දීර්ඝ කාලයක් මේ assets තියෙන්න පුළුවන් business එකේ අවුරුදු ගාණක්. එතකොට අපේ පොතේ definition එක කියන්නේ non current assets කියන්නේ current assets නොවන ඕනම asset එකක්. හරිද? අපි current assets ගත්තොත් දැන් current asset එකට definition එකක් තියෙනවා. ඉතින් ඒකත් අපි පාඩම් කරගන්න වෙනවා. simply කිව්වොත් අර මම කලින් කිව්වා වගේ මේ assets ඇවිල්ලා business එකේ මාස 12කට අඩු කාලයක් තුල තමයි business එකේ පවතින්නේ. used, sold or converted into cash within a short time period. And short time period කියන්නේ 12 months වලට, less than 12 months වලට. නැත්නම් within 12 months. මේක මාස 5ක් වෙන්න පුළුවන්, 3ක් වෙන්න පුළුවන්, මාසයක් වෙන්න පුළුවන්, මාස 12ට අඩුයි. හරි? ඒතර එහෙම current assets වලට උදාහරණ තමයි අපි stock එක business එකේ ගන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ වගේම debtors, ඒ වගේම cash. දැන් stock එක කියන්නේ අපි දන්නවා business එක තමන්ගේ customerට විකුණන දේට තමයි අපි stock එක කියන්නේ. ඒතර book shop එකක් ගත්තොත් ඒගොල්ලෝගේ stock එක stationery. furniture shop එකක් ගත්තොත් furniture, ලී බඩු. car sale එකක් ගත්තොත් ඇත්තටම motor vehicles. මේකයි short term asset එකක් විදිහට අපි කියන්නේ. නැත්නම් current asset එකක් විදිහට කියන්නේ. හේතුව business එකක් තමන්ගේ stock එක පුළුවන් තරම් ඉක්මනට cash වලට convert කරන්නයි බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්නේ. පුළුවන් තරම් ඉක්මනට cash වලට convert කරනවා කියන්නේ පුළුවන් තරම් ඉක්මනට stock එක විකුණලා ඒක සල්ලි කරගන්න එක. ඒතර මේක බොහොම කෙටි කාලයක් තුල පුළුවන් තරම් ඉක්මනට කරන වැඩක්. ඒ නිසා අපි generally ගත්තාම business එකක stock එක අපි හඳුන්වන්නේ current assets කියලා. හේතුව මේක අවුරුද්දට අඩු කාලයක් තුල සල්ලි වලට convert වෙන නිසා. right? එතකොට පොඩි කාලයක් තමයි business එකේ තියෙන්නේ. මාස 12ට අඩු කාලයක් තමයි business එකේ තියෙන්නේ. ඊට debtorsලා. debtorsලා කියන්නේ business එකට ණය වෙච්ච customersලා. එතකොට අපි හිතමු business එකක් debtorsලා ඇති කරගන්නේ ඇත්තටම මේ business එක තමන්ගේ stock එක ණයට විකුණලා. එතකොට business එකක් තමන්ගේ stock එක ණයට විකුණුවොත් ඒ ණයට ගත්තු පාර්ශවය තමයි අපි debtor කියලා කියන්නේ. ණය ගැතියෝ. හරි? ඒතර සාමාන්‍යයෙන් business එක මේ debtorට දෙන්නේ theoretically ගත්තොත් සාමාන්‍යයෙන් maximum period එක 3 months. ඒකට කියන්නේ credit period එකක්. කියන්නේ ණය settle කරන්න දෙන ණයට ඉන්න පුළුවන් කාල සීමාව. ඒතර මේ මාස 3 තුල අනිවාර්යෙන් මේ debtor මුදල් ගෙවන්න ඕනේ business එකට. ඒ කියන්නේ මේ debtor cash වලට convert වෙනවා within a short period. within 12 months. ඒ නිසා debtors ලත් ඇවිල්ලා අපි සලකන්නේ current assets කියලා. හරි අවසානයේ cash. cash කියන්නේ හැම තප්පරෙම වෙනස් වෙන asset එකක්. ඉතින් මේක කොහොමත් current asset එකක්. ඒක කියන්න දෙයක් නැහැ. ඒතර තව දෙයක් පුතා මතක තියාගන්න cash සාමාන්‍ය business එකක තියෙන්න පුළුවන් බැංකුවේ සහ අතේ. ඒතර අපි කියන terms දෙක තමයි cash at bank සල්ලි බැංකුවේ දාලා තියෙනකොට ඇත්තට මෙතන බැංකුව කියන්නේ ඇත්තටම current account එකක තියෙන සල්ලි අපි ඒව ගැන කතා කරමු ඉස්සරහා chapters වල cash in hand කියන්නේ අතේ තියෙන සල්ලි ඒ කියන්නේ සාමාන්‍ය business එකේ drawer එකේ දාලා තියෙන සල්ලි තියලා තියෙන සල්ලි එතකොට cash at bank තියෙනවා ඒ වගේම cash in hand තියෙනවා ඉතින් generally මේක අපි cash කියලා හඳුන්වනවා මුදල් okay now let's learn about non current assets. In simple terms, these are the long-term assets of the business. So this means these assets prevail in the business for a longer period of time. It's like for years. These assets are used in the business for years, more than a year. So for several years. But according to our textbook definition, the non-current assets are all the assets that cannot be considered as current assets. Right? So this is your textbook definition. All the assets that cannot be considered as current assets are called non-current assets. So remember, these assets are used in the business for years, for a longer period of time. So according to your syllabus, you have 5 non-current assets: land and building, so the land of the business and the building of the business. And then motor vehicles, this means like vans, lorries, maybe motor cars, motorbikes. Then machinery, that means about machines. Then furniture, and finally equipment. Right. Okay, now I'm going to teach you one more non-current asset. It is actually long-term investment. As an example, I can say that a fixed deposit. Now, there are short-term fixed deposits, but this is a long-term fixed deposit. Let's say 5 years fixed deposit. We normally say FDs, FD means fixed deposit, right? So these fixed deposit about investment, I'll teach you when you go to grade 11. Okay? For now, just remember long-term investments also come under non-current assets. Right? When I teach you in grade 11, you will get a better idea. So don't worry for now. So for now, just study these 5 non-current assets: land and building, motor vehicles, machinery, furniture, equipment. Right? So these assets prevail in the business for a longer period of time, for several years. හරි මේක තව පොඩ්ඩක් පැහැදිලි කරොත් ඔයගලන්ට දැන් ඔයාලගේ සිලබස් එකේ කියන විදිහට ඩෙෆිනිෂන් එක කියන්නේ non current asset එකක් කියන්නේ ඕනම asset එකක් current asset නොවෙන. හරි එතකොට current asset එකක් වෙන්නේ නැත්නම් ඒ asset එක අනිවාර්යෙන් non current asset එකක් කියලා තමයි අපේ book එකේ තියෙන්නේ. හරි grade 10 book එකේ තියෙන්නේ. ඒතර මේකට හොඳම උදාහරණ තමයි land and building නේ motor vehicles ඒ කියන්නේ business එකේ තියෙන trucks, lorries, එහෙම නැත්නම් motor cars තියෙන්න පුළුවන්, motor vans තියෙන්න පුළුවන්, එහෙම නැත්නම් motor bikes තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. මේ වගේ වාහන, business එකේ තියෙන වාහන. ඊට පස්සේ machinery කියන්නේ machines. දැන් අපි factory එකක් වගේ ගත්තොත් machines තියෙන්නේ. Especially commodity manufacturing businesses වල, කියන්නේ factories වල තියෙන්නේ mainly machinery කියන asset එක. ඒක non current asset එක. ඊට පස්සේ furniture. අපි දන්නවා furniture ලී බඩු. හරි? ඊළඟට equipment. right? equipment කියන්නේ උපකරණ. දැන් ඔය tools වගේ දේවල්. right? tools, utensils වගේ දේවල්. right? ඉතින් දැන් සාමාන්‍යයෙන් ඇත්තටම non current asset එකක් කියන්නේ business එකේ අවුරුදු ගාණක් ඒ කියන්නේ අවුරුද්දකට වැඩි කාලයක් business එකේ පාවිච්චි වෙන assets. ඉතින් obvious land and building කියන්නේ business එකත් එක්කම business එක තියෙන තාක්කල් ගොඩක් වෙලාවට ඒක business එකත් එක්ක තියෙන මේ non current asset එක. Now if you differentiate the current assets and the non current assets, the main difference is, in simple terms, current assets are short-term assets and non-current assets are long-term assets of the business. Okay, so now let's learn liabilities. Right, so this is your second element in accounting elements. You learn assets, now you are going to learn liabilities. Right, now simply a liability is a payable. Now asset is a resource controlled by the business name. Now here a liability is a payable of the business. So liabilities are simply payables of the business. Okay, and again that arose as a result of past transactions. A liability comes to the business because of a past transaction. Now, similar to assets, right? Even an asset comes to the business because of a past transaction. Same here. A liability occurs in a business because of a past transaction. Right, now let's take one of the very famous liability of a business is bank loan. Now, how come a bank loan occur in a business? What's the past transaction? If the business obtains a bank loan, only the liability called bank loan occurs in the business. So a bank loan is a liability. And bank loan occurred due to a past transaction. So the past transaction is obtaining a bank loan or obtained a bank loan. Okay. So likewise, liabilities occur in the business as a result of past transactions like the assets. So here again, you have three characteristics of a liability, right? Number one, arose as a result of a past transaction. Now notice this characteristic. Now this is actually a common characteristic of both assets and liabilities, isn't it? Even one of the characteristics of an asset is arose as a result of past transaction. So same here, one of the characteristics of a liability is arose as a result of past transaction. So this is a common characteristic for both assets and liabilities. And then this liability actually is a current obligation. So we can say as a characteristic, having a current obligation, right? And then final characteristic is outflow. What? Outflow. Do you remember under assets? It was inflow. Now here we have outflow of economic resources. Now once again here economic resources means simply money, right? It's about money. So outflow of money when settlement is made. When the settlement is made, money will outflow from the business to the outside, actually, to a outside party, maybe to an outside institute, right? Now, let's say a bank loan, a business obtain a bank loan. Now, once a business obtains a bank loan, the business should settle this bank loan to the bank, right? So once the settlement is made, what happens? It will become an outflow of economic resources. So another characteristic of liability is outflow of economic resources when settlement is made. So you have 3 characteristics of a liability. So students, study characteristics of assets as well as liabilities. Okay, right. Now, what are the examples for liabilities? Definitely, now you know that a bank loan is a liability. It's a payable of a business. What else? Now, similar to assets, liabilities also have 2 categories, right? So let's see. There are 2 types of liabilities, like the assets, current liabilities and non-current liabilities. Okay, let's see what current liabilities are and what non-current liabilities are and their examples. Now here, when you consider current liabilities, the meaning of current here, once again, short term. So in accounting, short term means within 12 months, right? Within 12 months. So we know that liabilities are payables now, right? So current liabilities are the liabilities that should be settled. If it is a liability, the business has to settle it, right? Now this liability, that means this current liability should be settled within a short period of time. That means within 12 months. 12 months. Okay. So that's all. So these are current liabilities. Right? A liability which should be settled within 12 months is a current liability. So in your syllabus, you have creditors, right? Accrued expenses and bank overdraft as examples. Right, I'll explain each one of these. Now, a creditor is a credit supplier of the business. That means the business owes this particular creditor. Okay. For example, if this is a bookshop, right? Can you remember the earlier example? Under business transactions, they are actually, our supplier was ProMate. Do you remember? Right? So let's say this bookshop, right? purchased, okay, this bookshop purchased a stock of goods on credit, right? Now what happens? This particular supplier becomes the creditor. So the bookshop owes this creditor, right? Bookshop should pay this creditor. Let's say the worth of this stock is, let's say, 50,000 rupees. Now the bookshop owes 50,000 rupees to this particular creditor. It's promate here. So creditors are considered as current liabilities. Why it's current? Why it is a short term? Because this bookshop should pay promate 50,000 rupees within a shorter period of time. The maximum credit period might be 3 months. Right now, this is like opposite of debtors. Do you remember debtors? Debtors are current assets, no? Here, creditors are current liabilities, right? So the maximum credit period that will be given by this promate to this particular business will be, so within 3 months, this bookshop has to pay, right? The money should be settled within 3 months. 3 months is a short period, right? It's a short period of time. That means it's a current liability. So remember, creditors are current liabilities. Now compare and study this. Debtors are current assets, whereas creditors are what? Current liabilities, right? So debtors owe to the business, right? And business owe to the creditors. Are we clear? So debtor becomes an asset and a creditor becomes a liability. So creditor is a payable, right? Payable to the business, and the debtor becomes an asset to the business. Are we clear? So compare and study. Okay, right. Now the next current liability is accrued expenses. Okay, now what's the meaning of accrued? Puta, accrued is payable. The meaning here is payable. Accrued means simply payable. So there are payable expenses. Now there is a difference between a paid expense, right? And a payable expense. So what's the difference actually? Now this one is already paid, no? Right? So this is an expense. A paid expense is just an expense. Can you remember, according to our accounting elements, we have 5 accounting elements, no? Right? So one of the accounting elements is expenses, right? So if an expense is already paid, we consider that item as an expense. Now, for example, let's say we paid our businesses electricity charge or electricity bill. Okay, so paid electricity charges, right? So this is actually an expense. This electricity charges, let's say the amount is 10,000 rupees. So this 10,000 rupees is an expense to this particular business. right? But let's say there is an expense which is payable. Now, let's say this business hasn't paid its last month electricity bill, right? Then what happens? That electricity charges amount is accrued, or in other terms, payable. So if the business hasn't paid the particular expense amount yet, it is considered as a liability. So out of the accounting elements, a payable expense is considered as a liability. So payable electricity bill, payable insurance charges, payable rent or accrued rent, right? These are actually, remember Puta, liabilities. Which liabilities? Current liabilities. So an accrued expense or accrued expenses are considered as current liability. Why it is current? Because now when you take electricity charges, a business cannot wait for like years to settle it, right? I mean, the business cannot run its operations without paying the electricity bill, isn't it? The electricity board will come and disconnect, right? They will disconnect the electricity supply. So within a shorter period of time, within 12 months, actually less than 12 months, right? This business has to pay this payable expense, accrued expense, right? So these are actually any payable, any accrued expense is a current liability, right? The last current liability is called bank overdraft. Okay, it is bank overdraft. Right, now this is actually this bank overdraft you will learn under chapter 9 when you learn bank account. Right, but for now I'll give you very simple meaning. Don't worry, you will learn in a better way when I teach you chapter 9. Right, so please wait till you learn chapter 9. Okay, Buddha. Right, now here for now, just imagine this business, whatever business, has a bank account. And this bank account name, actually the type of the bank account is current account. We call them current accounts. Right? I'll teach you everything when we follow chapter 9, right? What a current account is and what is this bank overdraft, right? But for now, just imagine that there is a current account for this particular business and there is no money in this current account. So the bank gives some amount, some money amount as a loan for this business to issue checks. So if you do not know what checks are, don't worry. I'll teach you under chapter 9. Okay. So that's the simple meaning. It's like a loan given by the bank for the business. And this amount of bank overdraft is a payable for the business. So the business has to pay that bank overdraft amount. It's like a loan amount, right? So the business has to pay this bank overdraft amount actually with interest to that particular bank. Okay. So once again, this is actually a current liability because that bank overdraft amount should be paid within 12 months to the bank. Okay, right, that's it. So these are your current liabilities. Study now. Creditors, accrued expenses, and bank overdraft. Okay, we have only 3. under grade 10 syllabus. But when you go to grade 11, you will learn more, right? Okay, let's take a look at the definition of non-current liabilities. So these are liabilities, all the liabilities that cannot be considered as current liabilities. But remember, these liabilities are long-term liabilities of the business. Or in other words, long-term payables of the business. That means the business takes more than a year to settle these liabilities. The best example for the non-current liabilities is bank loan. So under your syllabus, you have only one non-current liability, and it is bank loan. Right? But remember, this should be a long-term liability. Let's say, for example, 5 years bank loan or 10 years bank loan, maybe 3 years bank loan. So it should be more than a year. So the business takes more than a year to settle this liability. Example, if it is a 5 years bank loan, that means the business takes 5 years to settle this bank loan amount to the bank. Are we clear? Then non-current liability කියන්නේ simply long-term liabilities. අපි දන්නවා liability එකක් කියන්නේ business එකේ payable එක. එතකොට මේ liability එක settle කරන්නේ business එක අවුරුද්දට වැඩි කාලයක් අරගෙන. අවුරුදු 3ක් 5ක් 10ක් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. දැන් උදාහරණයක් විදිහට අපි බලමු අවුරුදු 5ක loan එකක් business එක අරගෙන තියෙනවා නම් ඒ කියන්නේ ඒ business එක අවුරුදු 5ක් ගත කරනවා ඒ liability එක ඒ bank loan amount එක බැංකුවට settle කරන්න. අවුරුදු 5ක් ඇතුළත තුල තමයි මේ ණය මුදල settle කරලා දාන්නේ බැංකුවට. හරි? ඒ නිසායි අපි මේක long term කියලා කතා කරන්නේ. ඒ long term කියන්නේ ඇත්තටම non current කියන තේරුම. හරි? non current liabilities කියලා කියන්නේ ඒ business එක අවුරුද්දට වැඩි කාලයක් ගත කරන නිසා ඒ liability එක settle කරන්න. මම current liabilities උත් චුට්ටක් සිංහල එකතු කරලා පැහැදිලි කරන්නම්. දැන් current liability වල තියෙන්නේ මේ liability එක settle කරන්නේ short period of time, within a short period of time. අඩු කෙටි කාලයක් තුල තමයි මේ liability එක settle කරන්නේ. ඒ කියන්නේ හරියටම මාස 12ට අඩුයි. මාස 12ට වැඩි වුණාම තමයි අපි long term කියන්නේ. එතකොට මේකට තියෙන උදාහරණ තමයි creditors, accrued expenses උයි bank overdraft එකයි. creditors කියන්නේ business එක මේ creditors වලට ණයයි. හේතුව business එක දැන් අපි හැමතිස්සෙම කතා කරන්නේ business එක පැත්තෙන්නේ. හරි? එතකොට business එක මෙයා supplier කෙනෙක්. හරි? මේ දැන් මෙහිමයි මෙයා supplier කෙනෙක් වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්, සමහරට ණය මුදලක් දුන්නු කෙනෙක් වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්. අපි සාමාන්‍යයෙන් ගන්නේ supplier කෙනෙක් අපේ syllabus එකේදී. එතකොට අපි හිතමු යම්කිසි supplier කෙනෙක් ඉන්නවා. දැන් උදාහරණයක් අර කලින් ගත්තු example එකේ business එක bookshop එක supplier promate. එතකොට bookshop එක ණයට stock එක ගත්තොත් මේ promate ගෙන් නම creditor. promate ඇවිල්ලා creditor වෙනවා. හරි? එතකොට එතනදී වෙන්නේ bookshop එක ණය වෙනවා promate කියන creditor ට. එතකොට දැන් මෙතන නම් ණය වෙන්නේ කොච්චරද? 50,000 rupees. රුපියල් 50,000ක් ණය වෙනවා. එතකොට රුපියල් 50,000ක creditors කියන current liability එක business එකට ඇති වෙනවා. හරි? එතකොට creditors කියන්නේ current liability එක. හරි? ඒක liability එකේ value එක තමයි දැන් මේ example එක අනුව නම් 50,000 rupees. තේරුණා නේද? ඉතින් ඊට පස්සේ accrued expenses. accrued කියන්නේ payable. ගෙවිය යුතුයි. සිංහලෙන් කියනවා ගෙවිය යුතු. ගෙවිය යුතු වියදම්. කියන්නේ අපි වියදම ගෙවලා නැහැ. ගෙවන්න තියෙනවා. දැන් ඒකයි මම අර කලින් කිව්වේ එක්ස්පෙන්ස් එකක් ගෙවලා නම් paid නම් එයාට අපි කියන්නේ expense. දැන් ඔයාලට මතක ඇතිනේ නේද අපිට accounting elements පහක් තියෙනවා. හරි? එකෙන් එක accounting element එකක් තමයි expense කියන්නේ. එතකොට මොකක් හරි expense එකක් මුදල් වලින් ගෙවලා නම් එයා expense. හැබැයි මොනවා හරි expense එකක් ගෙවලා නැහැ තාම ගෙවන්න තියෙනවා නම් අන්න අපි යාව categorize කරන්නේ liabilities යටතේ. එතකොට මේ payable expense එක එහෙම නැත්නම් accrued expense එක current liability එකක් විදිහට තමයි අපි සලකන්නේ හේතුව දැන් උදාහරණයක් විදිහට electricity bill එක. business එකක් අවුරුදු ගණන් ගෙවන්න නැතුව ඉන්න බෑනේ. මොකද electricity board එක ඇවිල්ලා අනිවාර්යෙන් electricity supply එක disconnect කරනවා. නේ? පොඩි කාලයයි තියෙන්නේ. මාස දෙකක් හෝ තුනක් වෙන්න පුළුවන් නේ? ඒ නිසා අඩු කාලයක් ඒ කියන්නේ කෙටි කාලයක් තුල අනිවාර්යෙන් මේ liability එක settle කරන්න ඕනේ. එතකොට නොගෙවපු වියදම් අනිවාර්යෙන් business එකේ liabilities එහෙම නැත්නම් වගකීම් ඒක හැබැයි කෙටි කාලේ ණය. අඩු කාලෙකින් මේ ණය මුදල එහෙම නැත්නම් ගෙවිය යුතු මුදල ණය මුදල නෙමෙයි ඇත්තටම හරියටම කියන්න ඕනේ මේ ගෙවිය යුතු මුදල ගෙවන්න ඕනේ. හරි? එතකොට මේක liability එකක්. හරි නේද? ඉතින් එහෙමයි. ඊට පස්සේ තුන්වෙනි උදාහරණය තමයි bank overdraft එක. bank overdraft කියන්නේ ඉතින් ඇත්තටම පුතා මම ඔයාලට මේක හොඳට explain කරන්නම් chapter 9 වල. මොකද අපේ chapter 9 එකේ තියෙන්නේ bank account එක කියලා prime entry book එකක් කියලා කියන්නේ අපි. ඒක ගැන study කරනකොට ඔයාලට හොඳට තේරෙයි මේ bank overdraft එක කියන්නේ මොකක්ද කියන එක. හරි දැනට නිකන් simply හිතන්න business එකක් maintain කරනවා bank account එකක් ඒකේ නම current account. ජංගම ගිණුම. ජංගම ගිණුම. එතකොට මේ current account එකේ අපි හිතමු සල්ලි නැහැ. business එකට සල්ලි නැහැ account එක ඇතුලේ. account එකේ සල්ලි නැහැ business එකට. හරි? එතකොට bank එකෙන් ණය මුදලක් අරගෙන ඒ business එක තමන්ගේ checks issue කරනවා. හරි මොකද current account එකක් තියෙන කෙනෙකුට ඇත්තටම checks වලින් payment කරන්න ලැබෙනවා. ඒ ගැන අපි හොඳට ඉගෙන ගමු. හරි? chapter 9 වල. දැනට හිතන්න account එකේ සල්ලි නැහැ. වියදම් කරන්න සල්ලි දෙනවා බැංක් එක. එතකොට ඇත්තටම මේ බැංකුවේ සල්ලි නේ තියෙන්නේ. බිස්නස් එකේ සල්ලි නෙවෙයිනේ. එතකොට බැංකුවේ සල්ලි ණයට ගත්තා වගේ තමයි. ඒ කියන්නේ payable එකක්. ඒ ණයට ගන්න මුදල ඒ overdraft වෙන amount එක අනිවාර්යෙන් බිස්නස් එක බැංකුවට ගෙවන්න ඕනේ. ඇත්තටම interest එක්ක පොලියත් එක්ක ගෙවන්න තියෙන්නේ. ඉතින් මේකට අවුරුදු ගණන් දෙන්නේ නැහැ බැංකුව. සාමාන්‍යයෙන් බිස්නස් එකට දෙන්නේ අවුරුද්දට අඩු කාලයක්. හරි? ඒතර අවුරුද්දට අඩු කාලයක් තුල බැංක් එකට මේ බිස්නස් එක ඕවර්ඩ්‍රාෆ්ට් කරපු amount එක ගෙවන්න ඕනේ. ඒ නිසා තමයි අපි බැංක් ඕවර්ඩ්‍රාෆ්ට් කියන item එක categorize කරන්නේ current liabilities යටතේ. හරි නේද? ඒතර මොනවද අපේ current liabilities study කරලා දාන්න මේ වෙලාවෙම? හරි? Creditors, accrued expenses and සහ bank overdraft. Okay, now let's talk about equity, right? Don't say equity. That's wrong. Wrong pronunciation. Equity, right? So this is your third accounting element. Now, what's the meaning of equity? The value of assets. Equity means the value of assets that belongs to the owners of the business, right? In Sinhala, ව්‍යාපාරේ අයිතිකාරයන්ට ව්‍යාපාරේ අයිතිකරුවන්ට අයිති වෙන, right? assets වල වටිනාකම, වත්කම් වල වටිනාකම. You know what assets are, right? You already know this. So assets are resources controlled by the business. Okay. Now, let me tell you this. All the assets doesn't belong to the owners of the business. What did I say? All the assets of the business does not belong to the owner of the business, owners of the business. Why is that? Now, let me give you an example. Let's say there is a business, okay? And there is only one owner. So what's the business type which has only one owner? It's a sole proprietorship, right? Sole proprietorship, right? So this is a sole proprietorship, right? And let's say this business obtained a bank loan, right? Bank loan of, let's say, 500,000 rupees. Okay, right. Now, what is this 500,000? It's cash, right? And you already know that cash is an asset, right? This is actually is an asset, right? Now, does this 500,000 belong to this particular owner? No, right? No. Why? Because this money belongs to the bank, isn't it? This is bank's money. And this business should settle this loan amount, this 500,000 rupees to the bank, isn't it? So the owner cannot claim ownership for this 500,000 rupees. So as I told you earlier, every asset doesn't belong to the owner or owners. So seriously, how do you calculate this equity? How to calculate this? For this, you have to actually deduct any liabilities, right? Any liabilities from the total assets of the business in order to arrive at the amount of equity. Are we clear? I'll show you with a calculation, right? Now study this definition. What is this? The value of assets that belongs to the owners of the business is called the equity. Equity name equity, right? Okay, look at these words, right? Let's go through. If the business has liabilities like bank loan, okay, a part of its assets has to be used to settle those liabilities, of course, right? After the settlement of such liabilities, the assets that remain belong to the owners of the business. So that's why I gave you this formula to calculate equity. That is, for us to find equity, we need to deduct the liabilities, the amount of liabilities, right, from the total assets. Okay, so this formula you have to study. Remember this, very useful formula. Sometimes you get an MCQ from this formula. Now, especially for the case study question, we might need this formula. Okay, so study this. What is this? Equity equals assets minus liabilities. Okay, fine. Now, let's go through a calculation, a simple one. Right. Now, this example, let me read. A business has 500,000 worth of assets. And then a bank loan amounting to 200,000 rupees and a bank loan amounting to 200,000 rupees. So 200,000 rupees out of 500,000 of assets has to be used to settle the bank loan. Yeah, of course. Right? So that's why I told you in the earlier, the cash obtained by a loan doesn't belong to the owner. It belongs to the bank because it's bank's money. Are we clear? So we need to settle that bank loan amount out of our assets amount, total assets amount, right? Therefore, the remaining assets worth 300,000 belong to the owner. That's the point. So this 300,000 actually, you can call this what? Equity. Okay, this is equity. Are we clear? So the business has assets 500,000 and liabilities, it's actually the bank loan, right? So we need to deduct the liabilities from the assets and we get 300,000 as our equity amount, right? Assets total 500,000 minus bank loan amount, that means liability amount 200,000. So this business has only one liability according to this example. Okay. Yeah, now this 300,000 belongs to this particular owner. Let's say this is just a sole proprietorship. So this 300,000 belongs to this sole proprietor, this owner. Okay, right. ටක් ගාලා මම තා පොඩ්ඩක් explain කරන්නම්. Right, දැන් මෙතනදී equity කියන්නේ ඕනට නැත්නම් ඕනර්ස්ලාට අයිති බිස්නස් එකේ assets ප්‍රමාණය, value එක. right? එතකොට දැන් අපි හිතමු loan එකකින් අපි ගන්න cash, business එකක් ලබා ගන්න cash ඕනට අයිති නැහැ. හේතුව ඒ සල්ලි බැංකුවේ සල්ලි නිසා. ඒතර අනිවාර්යෙන් loan එකක් ගත්තු business එකක් ඒ bank loan amount එක නැවත බැංකුවට settle කරලා තියෙන්න ඕනේ. ඒතර ඒ settle කරන්න වෙන්නේ business එකේ තියෙන assets වලින්. right? එහෙම වුණාම අපි equity හොයන්නේ assets total එකෙන් liabilities අයින් කරලා. right? ඒ calculation එක තමයි අර example එකේ මම කතා කළේ. එතකොට මේ මෙතන කියන wordings උත් ඒ තේරුම තියෙන්නේ. After settlement of such liabilities, the assets that remain. ඉතුරු වෙන asset ප්‍රමාණය තමයි ඕනට අයිති වෙන්නේ. Liabilities settle කරාට පස්සේ ඉතුරු වෙන assets ප්‍රමාණය තමයි ඕනට නැත්නම් owners-ලට අයිති වෙන්නේ. එහෙමනම් අපි අනිවාර්යෙන් මෙන්න මේ formula එක ඔළුවේ තියාගන්න ඕනේ. මොකද්ද මේ? equity හොයන්න නම් assets වලින් business එකේ තියෙන liabilities අයින් කරන්න ඕනේ. ඉතින් ඒක තමයි අපි මේ example එකෙන් කතා කරේ. business එකේ total assets ලක්ෂ 5ක් තියෙනවා නම් loan එකක් liability විදිහට තියෙනවා ලක්ෂ 2ක. එහෙනම් ලක්ෂ 3ක් තමයි ඕනට අයිති වෙන්නේ. ඒතර ඕනට අයිති වෙන assets ප්‍රමාණයට අපි කියන නම මොකද්ද? equity. හරි? Okay, now let's talk about income. Right? You know this term. It's a general word, just a common word. So what's the definition of income? Right? And what are the examples for income? Let me go through the examples first. Okay? Right. The main income of a business is sales. Right? This is actually the main income. Okay? Now, what is actually sales? Now, this is actually the income generated by selling the stock of goods of the business. Okay. This is the income generated by selling the stock of goods of the business. That means if we take a bookshop, by selling stationeries, the bookshop earns an income and we call it sales income or sales. So sales is the main income of a business. Okay. And then there are some other income sources. Other income, we call them other income, right? So for example, interest income. That means, let's say a business maintains a fixed deposit at the bank, right? You will learn about fixed deposit in detail when you go to grade 11, but I'm sure that everyone knows about fixed deposit. And this deposit gives interest income to the person or the business who maintains the fixed deposit, right? So interest income, or you can say interest received, right? Interest income or interest received is an income, actually an other income, right? Then rent income. Let's say this business has given upper floor of the building on rent. So the business can earn an extra income from the rent. So this is rent income or rent received. And maybe commission income. A business can earn commission, maybe by doing some brokering services, right? Right. Now let's take a look at the definition. So how do you define an income? An income is an increase in equity. Do you remember equity? What is equity? Value of assets belongs to the owners. So an income, remember, an income leads to increase equity. It leads to increase the assets belongs to the owner. Right. Except due to. Now, except what? Due to the increases from capital introductions. What are capital introductions? Okay, I'll explain, right? Now, you should remember this, right? Now, first of all, what is a capital introduction? Now, it is actually the term capital, right? The term capital refers to two different items. This is actually owners, I write here, owners, private or personal cash or properties invested to the business. Invested to the business. Capital means owner's cash or a private property that is invested to the business. We all know that when we start a business, we need to invest money. Not only money, we can invest any of our properties to the business, our personal properties to the business. Let's say a person started a business by investing his saved money, 500,000 rupees, and also his personal motor vehicle, let's say it's a motorbike. How do I draw a bike? Okay, it's like this, okay? I'm sorry, I can't draw this. Right. Let's say a motor car. Let's say motor car, right? It's better to draw. I mean, it's easy to draw. I drove a car. So this person invested his personal cash, 500,000 rupees, and his personal motor vehicle to this business, right? Now this cash amount and this vehicle belongs to the business now. But remember, it's the owner's private cash and private motor vehicle. Are we clear? Right? So there is a special word that we use to call owner's cash and properties invested to the business. We call it capital. Capital, right? So capital, because of capital actually, right? The equity of the business increases. It increases. Because of capital, equity increases. What is equity? It is the value of assets belongs to the owner of or owners of the business. Now, obviously, when owner puts his personal cash and properties to the business, business's assets increases, right? So that means value of assets belongs to the owner also increases. So this means actually equity increases. So remember, because of capital introductions, we normally say capital introductions. The equity leads to increase. But when we refer to an income, it is an increase in equity except due to increases from capital introductions by the owners or owner. Right, මම මේක සිනහ පොඩක් මික්ස් කරලා පැහැදිලි කරන්න. දැන් මෙහෙමයි. සාමාන්‍යයෙන් ඉන්කම් එකක් කියන්නේ ඕනට අයිති assets ප්‍රමාණය වැඩි කිරීමක්. An increase in equity. හැබැයි except due to increases from capital introductions. Capital කියන්නේ ඕන තමන්ගේ පෞද්ගලික මුදල් එහෙම නැත්නම් දේපල අපිට පුළුවන් ඒකට ගන්න මෝටර් රථ වෙන්න පුළුවන් මැෂින්ස් වෙන්න පුළුවන් බිල්ඩින් එකක් වෙන්න පුළුවන් ඕනම තමන්ගේ පෞද්ගලික දේපල properties business එකට ආයෝජනය කරලා නම් එහෙම නැත්නම් business එකට යොදවලා නම් ඒ දේවල් වලට තමයි අපි capital කියන්නේ. ඒතර හොඳට මතක තියාගන්න capital නිසා equity වැඩි වෙනවා. හරි? හැබැයි ඒ වැඩිවීම නෙමේ ඒක හැර equity වල වැඩිවීමකට තමයි අපි income එකක් කියලා කියන්නේ. capital වලින් වෙන වැඩිවීම හැර අනෙකුත් equity වල වෙන වැඩිවීම වලට කියනවා අපි income කියලා. okay. ඉතින් සාමාන්‍යයෙන් ව්‍යාපාරයක මේන්ම income එක ලැබෙන්නේ sales වලින්. අපි income එකට කියන නම තමයි sales. sales කියන්නේ simply business එකක් තමන්ගේ stock එක නැත්නම් තමන් customer ට විකුණන දේ විකුණලා හරි business එකක් තමන්ගේ stock එක විකුණලා ලබා ගන්න ආදායම. හරි? අපි උදාහරණයක් විදිහට book shop එකක් නම් stationery විකුණලා හොයා ගන්න ආදායම. furniture shop එකක් නම් furniture විකුණලා හොයා ගන්න ආදායම. මේකට කියන special term එක තමයි අපි sales. sales කියන්නේ business එකේ ප්‍රධාන ආදායම. main income එක. ඒ වගේම තව තියෙනවා ව්‍යාපාරයකට වෙනත් ආදායම්. other income. උදාහරණයක් විදිහට දැන් business එක fixed deposit එකක් maintain කරගෙන යනවා නම් අපි දන්නවා fixed deposit වලට bank එකෙන් ව්‍යාපාරයට interest එක ගෙවනවා. ඒ කියන්නේ business එකට interest ලැබෙනවා ආදායමක් විදිහට බැංකුවෙන්. fixed deposit එක maintain කරනකොට. ෆික්ස් ඩිපොසිට් එක පවත්වාගෙන යනකොට. එතකොට ලැබෙන interest received එහෙම නැත්නම් interest ආදායම පොලි ආදායම ඇවිල්ලා වෙනත් ආදායමක් විදිහට අපිට ව්‍යාපාරයක සලකන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ වගේම rent income එක. අපි හිතමු තියෙන building එකේ උඩ තට්ටුව rent එකට දෙනවා තව පුද්ගලයෙකුට නැත්නම් තව ව්‍යාපාරයකට. එතකොට ඒ rent out කරලා හොයාගන්න කුලී ආදායම නැත්නම් rent income එක business එකට income එකක්. other income එකක්. ඒ වගේම commission income එක. අපි හිතමු brokering වැඩක් කරලා income එකක්. right land brokering, property brokering මොනවා හරි brokering වැඩක් කරලා හොයාගන්න ආදායම. business එකේ වෙනත් ආදායමක් විදිහට යන්න පුළුවන්. ඒතර මේ ඔක්කොම ආදායම්, income. ඒතර income එකක් කියන්නේ simply equity වල වැඩිවීමක්. හැබැයි මතක තියාගන්න equity වල වැඩිවීම වෙනවා capital නිසා. ඒ වැඩිවීම හැර සාමාන්‍යයෙන් equity වල වැඩිවීම තමයි income කියලා කියන්නේ. Okay, now let's learn about the last accounting element. Expenses. Viyadam. Right. So what's the definition? An expense is a reduction in equity. It's a reduction in equity. An income is an increase in equity. Here, an expense is a reduction in equity. So remember this. Income leads to increase equity and expenses lead to decrease equity. Okay? So in the definition, we have to say that an expense is a reduction or a decrease in equity except due to drawings. Now, what are drawings? Now, remember there are two types of drawings. Cash drawings and stock drawings. Right. The meaning of drawings is, in simple terms, when the owner of the business withdraws the cash or the stock of the business for his personal use. We call them drawings. This is like the exact opposite of capital. Now, capital means owner's private cash or private property invested to the business. Now, here under drawings, the opposite happens. That means owner takes business cash or stock for his personal use. Okay? So, because of drawings, remember the equity lead to decrease. Even an expense leads to decrease equity. So when we are to define an expense, we have to say that it is a reduction of equity except due to drawings, except due to reductions from drawings. You can add these words if you want. Reductions except due to reductions from drawings. Because we know that drawings lead to decrease equity. So expense also leads to decrease equity. But when we are to define an expense, it should be a reduction in equity except due to drawings. Except due to reductions from drawings. Okay? Right. So what are the examples for expenses? What are purchases? Purchases are actually, cost incurred when purchasing the stock of goods. Purchases mean the cost incurred in purchasing the stock of goods. Now, this is actually an expense of a trading business. What is a trading business? Trading business means a buying and selling business. Buying and selling means, that means actually it's not a commodity manufacturing business. It doesn't manufacture its stock. The things that the business sells to its customers. So the stock is not manufactured. The stock is purchased from a manufacturer. So, for example, when we take the bookshop, right? A bookshop doesn't manufacture stationeries. A bookshop normally purchases stationeries from stationery suppliers. The bookshop keeps a profit and then sells to its customers, isn't it? So these kind of businesses are called trading businesses. වෙළඳ ව්‍යාපාර, right? So these businesses have to incur a cost when they purchase their stock, right? Then we have other expenses like salaries and wages, electricity expenses or electricity charges, insurance expenses or insurance charges, right? Interest expenses. What are interest expenses? Now, if the business obtains a bank loan, right, the business has to pay interest for this bank loan because of this bank loan. BL means bank loan. So this bank loan interest becomes an expense to the business. Likewise, we have different expenses, other expenses, right? So remember some of expenses: purchases, salaries and wages, insurance charges, electricity charges, interest expense, or you can say rent expense. Okay? Right. හරි. දැන් expenses කියන්නේ වියදම්. එතකොට වියදමක් කියන්නේ equity වල අඩුවීමක්. හැබැයි අපි දැනගන්න ඕනේ drawings නිසා වෙනුත් equity අඩු වෙනවා. හැබැයි expense එකක් කියන්නේ drawings වලින් වෙන අඩුවීම් හැර equity වල වෙන අඩුවීමක්. Okay? එතකොට drawings කියන්නේ ඇත්තටම ඕන business එකේ තියෙන cash එහෙම නැත්නම් stock එයාගේ personal use එකට ගෙනිච්චොත් අපි drawings කියලා කියන්නේ. දැන් drawings නිසා ඇත්තටම equity අඩු වෙනවා. ඇයි? එයාට අයිති දේ business එකේ එයා එයාගේ personal වැඩවලට ගෙනියනවා. එතකොට business එකේ එයාට අයිති assets ප්‍රමාණය අඩු වෙනවා. ඒ නිසා මතක තියාගන්න drawings නිසාවෙන් equity අඩු වෙනවා. හරි? එතකොට definition එක අනිවාර්යෙන් ඔයා මතක තියාගන්න ඕනේ පුතා. ඒ වගේම income definition එකට compare කරලා මතක තියාගන්න. මොකද income වල කියන්නේ an increase in equity, මෙයාගේ කියන්නේ a reduction in equity. ඒතර මේ දෙන compare කරලා මතකේ තියාගන්න. Okay, one more important point. The difference between income and expenses is called the profit or loss. So remember this formula. How to find out the profit or the loss of the business? You need to deduct expenses from the income, total income. Total expenses should be deducted from total income. So remember this formula. It's another useful formula, right? ව්‍යාපාරයක ලාභය නැත්තම් අලාභය හොයන්නේ අපි ඒ ව්‍යාපාරයේ තියෙන වියදම් වල එකතුව ආදායම් වල එකතුවෙන් අඩු කරනවා. Okay, now I'm going to discuss the activity 1 in your textbook. This is activity 1. Right, let's read the question. Following are some items of Yeshika's business who runs a canteen. Right, now we are given some items. Let's read these items later on. Let's straight away look at our question, right? Using a tabular format, that means using a table with columns, categorize each of the items under the columns of assets, liabilities, equity, income, and expenses. Right, easy question, right? Okay, now I'm going to draw a table. How many columns do we have to have? 5 columns, right? Okay, let's have 5 columns. Okay, I have 5 columns. Let's label them. Assets, liabilities, equity, income, expenses. Okay, what's the first item given? Electricity expenses. It says expense, electricity expense. So it includes the word expense. So it's obviously an expense, right? Right. Anyhow, electricity charges is an expense. Electricity expense. Next, investments. Now, for investment, remember, do you remember I told this? One of the best examples for investment is fixed deposit, right? FD means fixed deposit. Fixed deposit, right? So investment actually is an asset. Remember it? Investment is an asset. Do you remember I taught that 5 years or like long-term investment is considered as a non-current asset? Do you remember? So remember, investments are, investment is an asset. So investment or investments. Then we have commission received. Now, when you have the word received, the meaning of received is income, because income is received to the business, isn't it? Income is received by the business. Business එකකට ආදායමක් ලැබුණා. හරි, එතකොට commission ලැබුණා. ලැබුණු commission. ලද commission. ඒ නිසා මේක income. This is an income. Commission double S, double M, double S, isn't it? Commission received. Okay. Next we have sales. Do you remember? Sales is the main income. So sales comes under income. So we entered first 4 items. Now it's advertising expense. Obviously it says expense, and advertising actually Advertising charges are expenses. Advertising expense. Right. Bank loans are liabilities, right? So bank loans. Capital. Remember, capital and drawings both are equity items. Equity, right? So capital under equity. Next, creditors obviously are current liabilities. Do you remember? So creditors are under liabilities. And then commission paid. Now paid means that's an expense because expense is paid by the business, right? වියදමක් කියන්නේ ව්‍යාපාරයට කරන්න ඕනේ ගෙවීමක්. හරි? එතකොට ගෙවූ pay කරපු commission expense එක. Commission what? Paid. Next we have vehicles. Vehicles are assets. Right. Next one is vehicle repair expense. Now this is an expense, right? Vehicle is an asset. Vehicle repair expense is an expense. Okay, the next item is investment interest income. Now you're given the term income, so this is definitely an income. But if you're not given the term income, you should remember that this investment interest is actually an income. Okay. And on the other hand, interest paid on bank loan. This means bank loan interest. Okay. Bank loan interest is actually an expense. So compare and study now. Investment interest is an income. Bank loan interest is an expense. Okay. Right. So debtors are obviously assets. So shall we enter all three last items? Investment interest income under income. Debtors under assets. And then interest paid on bank loan under expenses. Right, that's it. We can close our table. We have entered all items. So this is your answer. Right, now let's move on to the activity 2. Right, this is activity 2 in your textbook. Sajini Perera is doing a business of selling garments. Now notice here. Now notice here that the stock of this business is garments. Are we clear? So classify the following items under given categories. Right. First thing is stock of garments. We know that it's a current asset. So classifying means let's put a tick here, no? Let's put a tick under the correct category. So it's a current asset. Stock is a current asset. Cash counting machines used by the cashier. Now, this is a garment selling business, right? That means like a clothing shop. Now, there are, machines used at the counter, used by, cashier, right? So, cash counting machines, these are definitely non-current assets. Machinery, isn't it? Non-current assets. Then amount payable for credit purchases of fabric. Now let's say this business actually sew garments. Now for them to sew the garments, they need fabric. Fabric becomes a raw material for this business if they sew garments. So if the fabric is purchased on credit, that means this business owes to the creditor, to the supplier who supplied fabric on credit. So the amount payable, amount owed to that particular supplier, we call them as creditors. Now it's the creditor, right? So that payable, amount payable to that creditor becomes a, do you remember, current liability. Then bank loan that was obtained to expand the business. Bank loan is a non-current liability. Hope you remember this. The building owned by the business is a non-current asset. And then point of sales machines means machinery, and machinery non-current assets. Okay, that's it. Very simple activity. Okay, students, thanks for watching. If you found this video useful, give it a like, share it, comment, and subscribe for more accounting video tutorials. If you have any questions regarding this lesson, let me know down below in the comments. Okay, then see you in another video. Take care.